Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our third digital event session for the 24-25 budget proposals. Thank you for taking the time to join us, either live this evening or via recording of the session. My name's Paul Sullivan, Active Travel Communications and Engagement Manager for Monmouthshire County Council, and this evening we are joined by Monmouthshire County Council Leader, Councillor Mary-Ann Brocklesby, and Councillor Ben Callard, Cabinet Member for Resources. So the format for this evening's session will be as follows. We'll have an introduction from the leader, presentation from Councillor Callard on the budget proposals. We'll take questions and answers that have been pre-submitted, and then we'll work through questions and answers received as part of this live session. If you look at the top of your screen, there's a question and answer feature. Please feel free to submit any questions as we move throughout the duration of the session. An hour and a half has been set. However, the time will be dependent on the amount of questions received and once we've responded to all of those that have been captured. I will now pass you over to the leader of Monmouthshire County Council, Councillor Mary-Ann Brocklesby, to begin the session.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and thank you very much for attending. I am very grateful that you have given your time to join with us to talk through our draft budget proposals for this coming year. It's important to us that we hear from you, that we hear suggestions you might have to improve what we're suggesting in our budget, but also your concerns with the type of decisions we've had to make. I'm sure you know, as well as everybody actually in the UK, the crisis that local authorities are facing after years and years of cuts and austerity, the cost of living crisis, which has affected us in the ways that it has also affected you and everybody living in Monmouthshire and elsewhere. So it's forced us to make challenging and really difficult decisions. The decisions that we've been made have been based on the principle of fairness, of ensuring that we always look after the people most in need and that we protect our environment. Foremost and at the front of our thinking is that we are responsible financially and that we are making decisions which ensures that our council not only has a future financially, but the services that we provide will be in place now and going forward in the future in a way that when better times come, and they will, we are already in good condition with our staff in place, still committed to providing services that work for you of good quality. I'm going to hand you over now to Councillor Callard, Ben, who's going to talk you through those decisions that we've made and why we've made them. And I'm looking forward, as he is, to hearing and answering your questions after the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary-Ann, and thank you, Paul, as well. It's my intention this evening to run through a short presentation which explains our budget for 2024-2025 and a bit of the context around it. It mainly focuses on the changes, as you'd expect. So if you see something that's not there and you're wondering what's happening to it, it's likely that it's staying the same. But as Paul said, please feel free to drop a question into the chat, and we can pick that up towards the end. So I'm just going to share my screen. And you should see a presentation. Paul, I don't know if you can just confirm that.
Yeah, all displaying.
Great, thanks. Okay, so 2024-2025. As Mary-Ann just mentioned, we're really seeing the culmination this year of a trend which we've seen for the last decade, really, whereby local government funding has been constrained. And inflation has been eroding away at our spending power. I'm sure you would have been aware of the last 18 months where we've had significant inflation. Thankfully, that's coming down now, but those costs, even though inflation is starting to come down, the costs don't come down, they just increase less quickly. So that's a cost burden that we are having to bear. And on top of inflation, we've also seen the energy price shock, which was caused by the war in Ukraine, and challenging job markets as well. So what does this look like for Monmouthshire? Well, for the second year in a row, we are facing cost pressures of over £20 million. And when we talk about cost pressures, what we're saying is that if our funding was to remain the same and our services were to remain the same, in order to fund those same services, we need to find an additional £21.9 million. So that's the gap that we need to try and bridge from 2023, 2024 to 2024, 2025. I think, it's worth saying that over the past decade, while local authorities' budgets have been squeezed, we've already made a lot of efficiencies. The services have already been changed. So in each increment, as we go down this route, finding those savings which don't affect the front line are harder and harder to find. The cost pressures that we're seeing are new demand on our services and the inflated costs of those. The recurrent demand, so demand continuing from last year and the inflation of those costs, pay inflation, which again speaks to the era of high inflation that we are in, and then the unwinding of one-off reserve usage. What that speaks to is that last year we used some money from our revenue reserves in order to support our budget, to support our services. This year, we have decided not to use our revenue reserves, and therefore we need to find that money from our revenue reserves last year in our revenue budget in order to keep a balanced budget. And then the last line there is the increased precept of £1.2 million, and that's a passported cost from the police and from our town and community councils. This slide shows where the council spends the money it receives. I think the main story here is that our two portfolios, children and young people and social care and health, make up 66% of our budget, and then the other third contains, a lot of the things that people think, that they associate with local authorities when they think about the services we provide. So that covers things like waste collections, transport, housing, leisure centres. So that gives a really nice view there of where the money goes. This slide explains how we plan to bridge the gap. So on the left-hand side here, we've got the cost pressures, which we're seeing from, moving from last financial year into this financial year. They make up the £21.9 million that I previously talked about. And on the right-hand side is our proposals in order to bridge that gap. So you can see that we're proposing service savings and changes to make £8.5 million. There's a proposed council tax increase of 7.5%, which brings in £5.4 million. Our grant increase from Welsh Government of 2.3%, which brings in £2.7 million. We've seen a reduction in our borrowing and energy costs. Police and community councils, I previously spoke about, that cost is passported across. And then fees and charges increase will raise an additional £800,000. So when we look at our key service pressures, I think really there's some numbers here that jump out. They are adult social care, £4.1 million. We saw in 2023, 2024, significant increases in demand in adult social care. We're expecting that to continue. It's not just a case of more people needing adult social care. It's also that the people who require it, the care that they require is more complex and therefore more expensive to deliver. There's also, another number that jumps out there is the recycling and waste additional costs. the recycling and waste market at the moment is very challenging and it's very volatile, and we've seen increasing costs in those areas. So when we look at the cost of delivering our services, I've spoken already about that £21.9 million gap. Our proposed income increases are £10.1 million, and then without our recourse to our reserves, we're looking at that final piece of the jigsaw, which is £8.4 million, which we need to find to balance our budget, and we need to find those from the services that we provide. So when we put together this budget, we set it around 5 core principles. The council leader, Marianne Brocklesby, mentioned them just before we started, and they are a financially responsible council, reducing inequalities, protecting our most vulnerable, protecting our environment, and planning for the future. The next slides I'm going to go through, they take us through the budget proposals directorate by directorate to show where we propose to find this £8.5 million, and we start with children and young people. It's our proposal to increase the budget by 2.5% next year. We know that won't fully fund the demand that we're seeing in that directorate area, so we're proposing to increase our schools funding by 2.5%, but we're aware that we're expecting a pay increase in our schools of 4.4% for teaching staff and 4.5% for non-teaching staff. Now, this increase of 2.5% is only going to cover 65% of that. The total value of the pay increase is about £2.2 million, and that leaves this gap of £835,000 that we are asking schools to find from within their existing budgets. We've also got a saving against additional learning provision, and I think this is an example of a really good initiative that we're putting forwards. We currently have a number of costly placements where children with additional learning needs, they go out of our county, we pay for that service, and what we're proposing is investing within our school estates within Monmouthshire to be able to provide those services in-house, as it were. It requires a bit of investment, but the net saving after that investment is £534,000, so I think it's really worthwhile. The Gwent Music Service, we're currently the last local authority in the Gwent region that subsidises Gwent Music. We subsidise them to around £48,000. We're proposing reducing that subsidy by £39,000, but leaving in place a £9,000 hardship fund, which will enable us to provide some support for pupils from low-income families. Before school clubs, for those of you who use our breakfast clubs, I know my children certainly do. These usually fall into, the sessions usually split in half. So we have the second half of the session, which is free. It's going to remain free. It's usually from 8:20 or 8:30 until school start. And you get a free breakfast as part of that session. And then there's the earlier session, which runs from 8 o'clock till 8:20 or 8:30, depending on the school. And there's currently a charge for £1 for that session. We're proposing increasing that charge to £2. The breakfast will remain free. For those children eligible for free school meals, that fee will also not apply. And I think it's also worth mentioning that there is one school within our county that has private provision of breakfast clubs, and that charges £4 for a breakfast club session. The last line item on this slide is our contribution to EAS, which is the Education Achievement Service. It supports our school and their governing bodies, and along with other local authorities in Wales, we're proposing reducing our core contribution to them by 10%, which saves £35,000. Moving on to our social care budget, it's our proposal to increase this budget by 5.8% next year. It sounds like a lot, but it doesn't cover the increase in costs that we're seeing in this area. So we're proposing to make the following changes to the service, which is a staffing review of adult social care. Currently, our adult social care director is carrying a number of vacancies. It's our proposal to formalise those vacancies and to, I guess, formally redistribute that work amongst the people already there. So it won't be a change in the staffing level. It will just be a consolidation of the existing vacancies. And also, we've got a great social care workforce in Monmouthshire, but where we've got social workers who are highly skilled, we want to make sure that we are directing their skills where they're most needed and where only they can work. And in the areas where less skill is required, you know, where we can use staff who perhaps aren't trained to that level, then we will do, and there is a cost saving associated with that. Adult social care practice change and children's practice change. This is really about making sure that we're right sizing the care packages that we provide adult social care and children's services. Working with our communities to try and facilitate re-ablement, try and keep people who receive care within, in their communities and supported in their communities. And there is, a cost save associated with that. And then fees and charges. We're proposing to increase the range of fees and charges that some of these services cost. But again, they are, people are subject to an individual financial assessment who receive this care. So if it's deemed that they can't afford the care, then they don't pay, or they pay a reduced amount. Moving on to our communities budget, we're proposing that this will increase by 6.3% next year. Although if you think back to the pie chart that we showed earlier on, as a percentage of our spend, this directorate is not such a big percentage of our total spend, so the increase in cash terms isn't as much as the other directorates will be facing. We're proposing to increase our garden waste collection fees by 10%. We made a commitment earlier last year to make sure that this service makes full cost recovery, and this step will take us to that, so that service is no longer subsidised. Food waste bag provision. Currently, you can pick up clear plastic food waste bags free of charge from our hubs. It's our proposal to sell those for cost price. I think it'll be around £1. But again, you can use, plastic bags or chopping bags, bread bags to put out your food waste, and we'll collect that. So it's not necessarily an added cost that our residents will have to pay, but it is, a cost saving to the council. We're removing our council car. Home to school transport. So as a rural county, we spend a lot of money. We spend millions of pounds in bringing our pupil population to their schools. In some cases, where we use taxis, the taxis have to travel a very long way from out of county, into our rural villages and places where the pupils live, and take them to school and then travel back a long way, and it's very expensive. So we're proposing to, where those contracts have become disproportionately expensive, to bring that service in-house and provide some 8-seater minibuses in order that we can provide that transport ourselves, and that yields a saving of around £96,000. We propose to increase the statutory planning application fees by 25%, although it's worth noting that this change will require a legislative change by Welsh Government. So if that change does not take place, this isn't a saving that we'll be able to realise. Car parking, we're proposing to increase our car parking charges and charges for permits by 10%. Similarly, in our trade waste, we're proposing to increase the fees we charge for trade waste. Although those of you who receive trade waste, I'm sure you'll be aware that new Welsh Government rules are coming in regards to trade waste, where businesses are going to be asked to recycle. And we've pitched the increase in trade waste fees such as that if you're able to recycle for the same volume of waste, providing your recycling is sorted, the uplift in fees is minimal. I think it's 30 or 40 pounds in that kind of range. And then homelessness. Currently, we have people in Monmouthshire who are in temporary accommodation because they've become homeless. We support them there so they can move on and get established in more permanent accommodation. In some cases, this accommodation, whether it be bed and breakfast or hotels, it's not optimal. It's very expensive, and so what we're proposing is, when they become available, utilising some of our council assets in order to provide that function. This provides a number of benefits in that we can provide more wraparound services into those into those assets where people are staying, in order that we can just support them to get into permanent accommodation, and it has the potential to yield a large saving for the council. So it's something that that we're very proud of and very very hopeful for. Our Mon Life budget is proposed to decrease by 3.2% next year. Our museums, we're proposing to close them for an additional day per week. We've got a great cafe at Old Station in Tinton. We're proposing to close that on Mondays, excluding bank holidays. It's the day where it's used the least. We're proposing to withdraw the Monmouthshire County Council contribution to Abergavenny Tourist Information Centre of £10,000. Although I'm pleased to say that Banabra National Park Authority and Abergavenny Town Council have between them stepped in to fill that void. So the Abergavenny Tourist Information Centre won't notice any changes to its funding. We have an outdoor education centre in Gilwern. It's well used. It's well used by our schools, and it's well used by schools from outside of our authority area. It's our proposal to increase the fees that we charge schools from outside of Monmouthshire to use our facility. I'm sure you'll be aware that many local authorities have reduced or completely removed their outdoor education facilities, and therefore ours, the demand increases towards ours, as you'd expect, and also to look at co-locating some different services at our Gilwern site in order that it better covers its costs. Our leisure centres, and this proposal has been reported in the press a bit. We're proposing to change the closing times of our leisure centres. So on weekdays, instead of closing at 10 p.m, they will close at 9:30. And on weekends, instead of closing at 6 p.m, they will close at 4:30. And then lastly, change the area management structure that we have in Mon Life, which will bring forward another £120,000 worth of savings. Our resources budget, which, if you look at our whole budget, makes up a very small proportion, but it will increase a little bit next year. But I'm pleased to say that we've seen an improvement in the rental income across our portfolio as a result of revised tenancy agreements. So that's a bit of good news there. Moving on to council tax. As part of these proposals, we're proposing to put up council tax by 7.5% next year. On an average Band D property, that represents an increase of just under £10 a month, and it provides £5.4 million of funding for our services. And if you think back up into this presentation of some of the things we've already been through, in terms of the savings that we are already having to make, including that £5.4 million of funding, that funding is really, really valuable. And I think when we look at the proposals, there's some things which aren't in there, which this funding supports. So we're not proposing to close any recycling centres. We're not proposing to close any leisure centres. We're not proposing to close any hubs, and we're not proposing to reduce the frequency of waste collections. So this funding that is generated from this council tax increase really goes toward protecting those services that people really value. And then along with that, there's help for those who struggle to pay their council tax. There's a number of schemes. There's discounts if you are a student or if you are a single occupier of a property, and also there's the council tax reduction scheme, which is a means tested or income based scheme to support those paying their council tax who may be on low incomes. Budgets carry risks. We know this. We saw it last year with our adult social care. I touched on it earlier, that we saw a large increase last year in our adult social care bill. I think it's the nature of being an organisation where we are legally obliged to provide services, but we don't have control over the demand for those services. So when our social care demand increases, we have to meet that social care demand. We have to meet those costs. Similarly, if we look back to last year, we had a transport provider that sadly went out of business. We had to retender that work, and the retender was more expensive. So it's worth, I guess, highlighting that in setting a budget, we acknowledge that there are risks associated with that, and that we're not using our revenue reserves this year to support our budget. Our capital programme, which oversees the maintenance of our roads, schools, leisure centres, farms and our other assets. We're going to continue our capital programme along the lines of our council priorities and our community and corporate plan. And I'm sure you'll be aware of the two really big investments we've got going on at the moment, which is the new 3 to 19 school, the new King Henry VIII school in Abergavenny, and the new care home that we're building in Crick Road. So this session is one of a number of sessions that we are holding, and we have been holding a public consultation for the budget. We've got a few more to come. We've had a few. We've had a really good response so far. I'd encourage you, if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat. Please send them in. We're collating all the questions and making them available on our website for people to see. And there are a number of in-person sessions next week as well. So I look forward to having your questions now, and I'm going to pass back over to Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. So we've received some questions. They are in the slides. We'll work our way through as per the reminder then, and the reminder I popped in the chat. If you do have any further questions, please do add them now. We'll work through the questions that we've got, and once we've got to the final one, we'll be closing the session. So please do take advantage and ask those questions whilst we've got the councillors with us. So the first question we've got is around our rapid rehousing. So the first question is, will the savings to rapid rehousing increase homelessness on our streets?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a really good question. The answer is that we hope no, it won't. This is more about changing the provision rather than reducing the provision. So we're hoping that actually with the additional wraparound services that we should be able to provide by moving this to into our own assets rather than using hotels and bed and breakfast, that in the long term it will help to reduce homelessness, because when we manage to help those people back into permanent accommodation, they're less likely to fall back into homelessness. So I wouldn't expect to see an increase in homelessness on our streets as a result of this policy. We know there are many challenges people are going through at the moment with the cost of living crisis, and that some people are really struggling and their situations are fragile. We are funding services to support those. We've got a very assertive outreach service that looks to tackle rough sleeping and support those people back into housing, and all of that's going to continue.
I'd like to add to that in that we've been working really hard over the last 18 months to make sure that those services which support people at risk, families and individuals, to seek help and get help before they become homeless. And if they do become homeless, there's a place they can go to. And what I'm really pleased about is that starting to show very clearly that we are reducing the numbers of people who are homeless. And our new focus on using our own assets is really going to help in that regard. But we are seeing people come forward with really complex needs, and that's making it more difficult. And why we've nearly needed to think about how we can do this differently, and particularly around our housing, but also in other savings that Ben has talked to you about. When we've thought about how do we save, we have always thought about how can we do it differently, how we can do it better. And the homelessness issue is one where we have really focused on doing that. And while none of us can be confident that we will not stop homelessness, given the current situation we find ourselves in, I do know we're doing everything possible to prevent it getting worse, and we're seeing that. We're seeing that pay results.
Thank you both. Okay, the next question is with regards to food waste bags. We touched on it in the presentation, but the specific question is, could food waste bags be provided to the most vulnerable?
I think that's a great point. I think it's something that we could do as well. It may be an idea to provide these via food banks free of charge. I think it would be difficult in our hubs in order to implement a scheme where we'd need to assess those who came in to see if they should or shouldn't pay. That could be quite complex, but I think there are definitely ways where we could provide that service. I think it's a great idea, and it's something that we should definitely consider.
Thank you. Okay, the next question may have covered aspects of this in the first question around the rapid rehousing programme, but I suppose just seeing if there's anything that we wish to elaborate on. So the question is, it was mentioned that council assets will accommodate homeless people. What assets and why haven't these been used previously? So we touched on some of those points earlier, but if there's anything we wish to expand on, feel free to do so.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for the question. To answer the question, what assets? We've got a number of residential assets across the county. Some of them are farm cottages. We've got some other accommodation as well. Why haven't these been used previously? It's a good question, but we can really only change the use of these buildings as they become available to us. So as a previous tenancy ends, then that's when we can look to take advantage of these changes. I think, at this point in time, it's looking like we're going to have the opportunity to be able to do that. So it's definitely an opportunity that we want to take.
Thank you. Okay, next question is with regards to our Children and Young People Directorate. The question is, following the acceptance of teaching unions of the Welsh Government's pay offer for teachers and school staff for this year, can the Council confirm that these increases will be funded in full by the Council from the funds provided by the Government and will not be taken from schools' already stretched budgets?
Thank you for the question. I touched on this in the presentation. Unfortunately, the answer is that we're not able at this time to fully fund the teachers' pay offer. Our settlement from Welsh Government of 2.3%, you will have seen that we are increasing our schools' budgets by 2.5%. So we're going further than the increase that we received from Welsh Government. But that cost of fully funding that pay increase of £2.2 million, we're proposing to fund around £1.4 million of that. It's around 65%. So we are going to be asking schools to look at their own budgets. We know it's going to be challenging for them. We've got financial support in our Children and Young People Directorate within County Hall, which is going to be offering support to our schools to help them to plan for the next financial year. And we've been consulting with them as well to, try and understand a little better how this looks to them and how they might be able to meet this challenge.
Thank you. Okay, next question relates to social care and health, and in particular adult services. The question is, can you explain what practice change looks like in adult services, please?
So, thank you for the question again. In order to support the delivery of these proposed savings in what is a very challenging environment, we're really looking on building on some practice changes that we started last year. This involves supporting practitioners to have conversations with individuals and families to explore how personal, family, community strengths can help support people to achieve their personal outcomes. Making sure that care and support plans are reviewed in a timely way so people aren't waiting. Sharing decision making and ownership of assessments and care plans at senior level, to support the practitioners and improving the consistency in terms of how we respond to people's needs. Developing practice around the use of assistive technology to support people's independence. Developing stronger links with housing and community-based support to ensure that people's long-term independence is maximised. And also ensuring that reablement services are available when people need them after an illness or time in hospital to really, reduce that time or try and reduce that time as much as possible that people require care so we can get them, back and fit in their communities as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Okay, next question's on council tax. So the question is, council tax is being raised by 7.5%. There is also a plan to alter the banding on houses. How is it expected that people with fixed incomes, for example, pensioners, find the money when they do not get benefits to cover the costs?
Thank you for this question. It's something that that we are acutely aware of. We know in Monmouthshire, with house values as they are, that there are a number of people in this county who, because of the way house prices have increased over the past couple of decades, find themselves, owning what is a very valuable asset, but with limited income. I mentioned it in the presentation that there are schemes available that the council administers in order to help people with their council tax bills. And I'd encourage anybody, if they think they may be eligible, to contact the council. All the details are on the website. We've got some really great staff there who are just ready to help. The question touched on the plan to alter the banding on houses. This isn't something that the council is doing. It's something that's being directed by Welsh Government, and it's looking to make council tax more progressive. We know in Monmouthshire, with our with our house prices being a bit higher, that it has the potential to impact residents in Monmouthshire higher, and we are making representations to Welsh Government along those lines. But at its core, and really what we're hoping it will just be, is a revaluation of properties. There's a situation in England where they haven't revalued any properties since the early 1990s, and as a result, there are people living in £1 million houses in London who are paying less council tax than people living in in a semi-detached house in Blackpool. And I really think that if we're going to have a tax which is based on property values, that should be kept up to date. So I would support the revaluation of our properties, but obviously that goes hand in hand with making sure that the residents of Monmouthshire aren't disproportionately affected, and that that level of support available to people to pay that council tax remains.
Thank you. Okay, next questions with regards to active travel. How can Monmouthshire County Council contemplate building a footbridge over the River Wye at exorbitant cost for a minority of people? Would the money be best spent on other things?
That's a really good question. And I think it's probably a question that a lot of people have in Monmouthshire when they see the council, going about large building projects, infrastructure projects, while services are under so much pressure. I think really it's a difference in the way these things are funded. So often, and especially with active travel, these schemes are grant funding. So the money for these schemes come directly from the Welsh Government to fund these specific schemes. We've got a really good active travel team in Monmouthshire, and we are very successful at winning grant money in order to take these schemes forwards. So we're seeing these projects come forward, which is really great, but it's a separate item from our revenue budget, which is the day-to-day funding of our services. I think if you asked me here today, if we had to fund a new bridge over the River Wye from our revenue budget, the answer would be, we're not going to do that. We're going to put the money somewhere else in the services, but it's not in our gift. And these schemes are funded, as I said, directly from Welsh Government for this specific purpose.
Thank you. Okay, next question is back to food waste bags. So this one is, how does the proposal to charge for food waste bags accord with the council's statutory duty to remove household waste free of charge?
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for the question. So we do have a statutory duty to dispose of household waste, but we don't have a statutory duty for its containment, so we can charge for its containment. I think the classic example of this is black bin liners for non-recyclable waste. We don't provide those free of charge. We never have. People go out and they buy their own bin liners, and food waste bags will very much fall into this category.
If I could add there as well, and this is a bit of a education that we all need to do around food waste, I think. It doesn't matter what plastic bag you use to put your food waste in. And we all get, even those who are trying of us who are trying desperately not to use plastic, we all get small plastic bags, maybe when we're picking up fruit and vegetables at the supermarket or whatever. Any of those bags can be used for food waste and be put in the caddy that we provided. You don't have to go out and buy food waste bags.
Thank you both. Okay, the last question we've got currently is: business rates are a burden on organisations which run village halls. Village halls are important community assets and are run by volunteers who face the challenge of earning enough money to pay the insurance, maintenance, energy and licensing fees, as well as business rates. Welsh Government's proposal to reduce the level of retail relief from 75% to 40% will affect all businesses who are entitled to the relief, including public houses and village halls. Can an exemption be made for village halls who are not actually businesses?
Thank you for the question, and I'll add that I'm very glad this question was submitted in advance, because we managed to go away and I've got some information that I'll impart to you about village halls specifically. On the business rate relief dropping from 75 to 40%, it's something that's not in our control, but we know it's going to have an impact on the businesses in Monmouthshire. So we are continuing to lobby, to protect that business rate relief. For village halls, there are a number of rate relief schemes available, of which the retail relief scheme is one. The other relief schemes depend on how the village hall operates. For example, an occupied village hall operating as a business with a rateable value of less than £6,000 wouldn't have to pay any business rates under the small business rate relief scheme. If their rateable value is between £6,001 and £12,000, they would receive tapered small business rate relief. Also, if the village hall is operating as a registered charity, they're eligible for 80% mandatory relief on their business rates. And if they're operating on a not-for-profit basis, they are eligible for a maximum of 80% relief capped at £2,500. The retail relief scheme is awarded alongside these reliefs and after all other reliefs have been applied. So I think there is support available, and if you've got any questions about whether you might be eligible for rate relief, I'd encourage you to get in contact with the council and we'll provide information to you to see what you may be entitled to. But just to finally add, the village halls dotted all over this county, they provide such a valuable space, for a number of workshops and activities and evening classes. So they really are a valuable asset to the county, and I know that that they often struggle to fill their calendars enough to make ends meet. So I really hear your concerns.
Thank you. Just checking. Yeah, there's no other questions that have been received. So I'll finish with a couple of points around the consultation process that we've still got in place running up until the 15th of February. And I'll pass back to the leader to close. So for everyone who's registered this evening, we'll follow up with a copy of the slide deck from Councillor Callard's presentation. If you haven't done so already, I'd encourage you to complete our survey to ensure your feedback is captured. We'll pop a link to the website and the survey in the chat function through this meeting for you to access now, but it'll also follow up in the email as well for direct access. A reminder that there's a series of ways you can engage one of these digital sessions, but we've also got face-to-face sessions. So we've got a session on Tuesday, the 6th of February at 6 o'clock, and Thursday, the 8th of February at 10 o'clock in the morning. So those sessions are still bookable. If anyone did want to come and join us, we'd really like you to come and speak to us face to face as well as a digital format. We've seen a significant movement towards the digital platform currently, with 92% of those engagements in digital. but getting face-to-face and speaking is really important as well. So those sessions are bookable, and they'll be bookable until 48 hours prior to the date of the session. Once again, can I thank you for taking the time to join us this evening and engage in this process. Please do complete the survey to ensure your feedback is captured, and I'll now pass back to the leader to close this evening's session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. It's been, when I reflect on the questions asked, the budget presentation given by Councillor Callard Ben, and obviously I've heard it quite a few times now, I'm really struck by how seriously our residents are engaging in the discussions we have. I'm really struck by the depth of questioning and the recognition, I think, that you see that the position the council is in, while maybe challenging, is responding to many of the areas that you think we need to keep going, keep providing services, and keep the quality of those services right. I'm also struck by how we are so often asked about, can we be confident? Are we sure? Do we have the evidence that we are supporting those most in need, like the homeless? And I think being held to account in that way, being asked those kinds of questions, are really important for us. They're really important that we are kept on our toes, kept in the right direction, kept to our promises by our residents. Because at the end of the day, we know people in Monmouthshire are really fair-minded and always want to support other people in the community, and that keeps us focused. So thank you for these questions. As Ben said, the ideas that you've put before us, for example, around food waste bags and how we could look into ways to make sure that those most in need don't have to pay, are ones we're going to go back and seriously reflect on. And when we come to council on the 29th of February, rest assured we will have taken into account the views that we've received, either through these sessions or through the survey. And I would almost plead with you that with your family and friends, encourage them to fill in that survey, encourage them to come to other engagement sessions, because we really do want to hear from you all. Thank you very much for coming tonight.